In the grand library of literary history, some figures command entire shelves. Their names are embossed in gold, their lives and works analyzed in countless volumes. Ernest Hemingway is one such figure. The name itself is a myth, a brand, conjuring images of stoic heroes, African safaris, deep-sea fishing, and a torrent of brilliant, world-changing prose. He was the titan of American letters, a man who lived as fiercely as he wrote, and whose life story, with its 4 wives and epic adventures, often eclipses the very novels that made him immortal. We are drawn to the myth. But myths are built on foundations, and titans are rarely self-made. They are shaped and supported, often in their fragile beginnings, by forces that the legend later forgets. In the story of Ernest Hemingway, the foundation was a woman often relegated to a subtitle, a biographical clause, the first Mrs. Hemingway. She is the ghost in the machine of his early success, the quiet partner in the whirlwind of 1920s Paris, the one who was there before the fame, the money, and the Nobel Prize. But to remember her only as a prefix to his name is to miss one of the most poignant and resilient stories of the lost generation. This is not the story of a victim, a footnote in a great man's biography. This is the story of the woman who was the first draft of his greatest love story, the silent investor in his genius, and the architect of her own quiet triumph. To truly understand the man who wrote the 20th century, you must first meet the woman who taught him how to love it. You must meet Hadley Richardson. Elizabeth Hadley Richardson was born on November 9, 1891, into a world caught between centuries. St. Louis, Missouri was a city of burgeoning industry and old-world propriety. For a girl of Hadley's class born into a once prominent family, life was a carefully scripted performance. It was a world of rigid social etiquette, of chaperoned walks, and of the unspoken but unyielding expectation that a woman's value was measured by the quality of the marriage she could secure. Her life was meant to be a reflection of her family's standing, a quiet testament to good breeding. But behind the lace curtains of the Richardson home, a deep and tragic drama was unfolding. Hadley's father, James, a man she adored, was struggling. A series of financial setbacks in the unforgiving world of business had plunged him into a deep depression. In 1903, when Hadley was only 12 years old, he took his own life. In the suffocating silence of Victorian society, suicide was not just a tragedy. It was a source of profound shame, a stain upon the family honor to be hidden away. For a sensitive 12-year-old girl, the loss was a seismic event, an unutterable trauma that would shape her emotional landscape for the rest of her life. It instilled in her a deep-seated fear of instability and a yearning for a protective masculine strength that had been violently ripped away. In the wake of this horror, Hadley's mother, Florence, retreated into a state of perpetual anxious mourning. Her grief transformed into a smothering, almost pathological, overprotection of her children, particularly Hadley, her youngest. This was compounded by yet another misfortune. As a young woman, Hadley fell from a second-story window, a serious accident that left her confined to her bed for many months. To Florence, this was confirmation of her deepest fears. The world was a dangerous place, and Hadley was an exquisitely fragile creature who must be shielded from it at all costs. And so Hadley's world, which should have been expanding, began to shrink. The years that should have been filled with dances, courtship, and the discovery of her own identity were instead spent in quiet convalescence and servitude to her mother's anxieties. Her one great solace was the piano. She was a gifted musician, and the keyboard became her primary means of emotional expression, a private world where she could be passionate and free. But outside of her music, she was trapped. By 1920, the world had been irrevocably changed by a world war and a cultural revolution. Flappers were dancing the Charleston, and the jazz age was in full swing. But in St. Louis, Hadley Richardson was 28 years old. Still living at home by the cruel standards of the day, she was a spinster, a woman left on the shelf. The death of her mother that year was both a grief and a quiet, terrifying liberation. For the first time, Hadley was her own woman, with a modest inheritance but no map for the future. She was shy, scarred by tragedy, and utterly starved for life. She traveled to Chicago to visit an old school friend, Kate Smith, hoping for a change of scenery, little knowing she was about to walk directly into her destiny. It was in Chicago, at a party, that she was introduced to the younger brother of one of Kate's friends. He was a journalist, a veteran, and a writer of ferocious ambition. He was Ernest Hemingway. At 21, he was 8 years Hadley's junior, a fact that was scandalous at the time. He was impossibly handsome, brimming with a restless, kinetic energy that seemed to fill the room. He had been badly wounded on the Italian front in the war, and this brush with death had given him an insatiable appetite for life. He was everything. Hadley was not. Loud where she was quiet, confident where she was shy, a whirlwind of motion to her stillness. The attraction was immediate and profound. To Hadley, Ernest was the embodiment of the life she had been denied. He was adventure, passion, and art. To Ernest, Hadley was a revelation. He was tired of flighty, superficial girls. He found in Hadley a woman of substance, a calming, nurturing presence that appealed to the wounded, insecure boy beneath his swaggering exterior. He saw her as a beautiful, intelligent woman, not a fragile invalid. As he would later write, she had a lovely mind. Their courtship unfolded primarily through letters, a torrent of correspondence that crossed the distance between Chicago and St. Louis. This was not a romance of casual flirtation. It was a deep and rapid intellectual and emotional bonding. He sent her his fledgling stories, and she, the accomplished pianist, understood the discipline and soul of an artist. Her feedback was not just praise, it was insightful and encouraging. She became his first and most important reader. He in turn saw past her shyness to the passionate, intelligent woman within. He gave her a new vision of herself. He wrote to her, "You are the one lovely, tender, and brave and beautiful thing that has happened to me." For Hadley, who had spent her life being defined by her limitations, this was nothing short of a rebirth. This charismatic young man didn't just want to save her from her lonely life. He saw her as an equal, a partner in the great adventure he planned to live. They married on September 3rd, 1921, despite the reservations of many around them. Hadley Richardson, the quiet woman from St. Louis, now possessed a new name and a ticket to a new world. A modest but crucial trust fund from her family provided them with a small, steady income. With this financial cushion and a letter of introduction from the esteemed writer Sherwood Anderson, they made a decision that would not only define their lives, but also alter the trajectory of modern literature. They set sail for France. Paris, in the early 1920s, was a city of glorious contradictions. It was the ancient heart of European culture, and at the same time, the white-hot center of the modernist revolution. For American expatriates fleeing what they saw as the Puritanism and provincialism of the United States, Paris was a haven. The favorable exchange rate meant that even a modest American income could sustain a bohemian lifestyle. It was a city of intellectual freedom, artistic experimentation, and cheap, plentiful wine. Ernest and Hadley's first home was on the top floor of 74 Rue du Cardinal Lemoine, a grim working-class building in the Latin Quarter. Their apartment was tiny with no running hot water and a primitive toilet that required buckets to flush. The smell of the goat herd housed on the ground floor often drifted up the stairs. It was, by all objective measures, a hovel. But as Hemingway would famously write decades later, we were very poor and very happy. This was the crucible where their partnership was forged. Their life was a finely tuned machine built for one purpose: to allow Ernest the time and space to become a great writer. He would rise early and walk to a rented room or a quiet cafe where he would write for hours in his notebooks, meticulously honing his revolutionary, stripped-down prose. Hadley, meanwhile, was the master of their domestic universe. She was the one who navigated the bustling, confusing open-air markets on the Rue Mouffetard, learning French on the fly. She was the one who managed their finances with painstaking care, keeping detailed ledgers to track every franc. She was the one who transformed their cold water flat into a home, a sanctuary of warmth and love. And critically, she was the one who spent countless hours typing his handwritten manuscripts, deciphering his scrawl, and literally transcribing his genius into a legible form. But her role was far more than domestic. She was his confidant and his first audience. At the end of a writing day, he would read his new work aloud to her. She possessed an intuitive understanding of his art, and he valued her judgment immensely. This was their golden age. Their life was a tapestry woven from small, perfect moments. Long walks along the Seine, cheap meals at cozy bistros, afternoons spent betting on horses at the Auteuil racetrack, and evenings filled with conversation and wine. They were soon welcomed into the inner circle of the lost generation's high priests and priestesses. At 27 Rue de Fleurus, they entered the salon of Gertrude Stein and Alice B. Toklas. The walls were covered, floor to ceiling, with a staggering collection of modern art, paintings by Picasso, Matisse, and Cézanne that were still considered radical and shocking. Stein, a formidable intellectual and literary innovator, became a mentor to Ernest, offering him harsh but invaluable critiques. She took a special liking to Hadley, whom she found to be a grounding, sensible presence amid the often volatile artistic egos. Through Stein, they met everyone. They socialized with Ezra Pound, the fiercely intelligent poet who also took Ernest under his wing. They spent time with F. Scott Fitzgerald and his beautiful troubled wife Zelda, whose glamorous alcohol-fueled lifestyle stood in stark contrast to the Hemingways' more disciplined poverty. Hadley, the shy woman from St. Louis, was now at the very heart of a cultural earthquake, holding her own with quiet grace. In 1923, their partnership deepened with the birth of their son John, affectionately nicknamed Bumby. Now a family, their bond seemed unbreakable. But the gods of fortune are notoriously fickle, and a simple journey was about to unleash a devastating blow. In December of 1922, Ernest was on assignment in Switzerland covering a peace conference. Hadley, wanting to join him for a ski holiday, hatched a plan. In a gesture born of pure love and supportive intent, she decided to bring him his work, thinking he might want to show it to an editor he was meeting. She painstakingly gathered every single piece of paper related to his fiction writing. The original handwritten manuscripts of his stories, the typed versions, and, in a fateful, catastrophic decision, all of the carbon copies. It was the entirety of his creative output from their time in Paris, a treasure trove of irreplaceable work. She packed it all into a single leather valise. At the Gare de Lyon, one of Paris's busiest train stations, she bought her ticket and boarded the train to Lausanne. For a brief moment, she left her seat and the precious valise to buy a bottle of Evian water from a platform vendor for the journey. The stop was brief, no more than a minute or two, But when she returned to her compartment, the valise was gone. A cold wave of panic must have washed over her. She would have searched frantically, her heart pounding, questioning the porter, looking under the seats. But it was no use. Someone had simply seen an unattended bag and seized the opportunity. The valise, and with it, the entire literary beginning of Ernest Hemingway, had vanished into the Parisian underworld. The train journey to Switzerland became an odyssey of mounting dread. How could she tell him? How could she explain this monumental, unforgivable lapse? When she finally met Ernest on the platform in Lausanne, the story spilled out in a torrent of tears and despair. His reaction was not one of rage, but of something far worse, a hollow, soul-crushing disbelief. He couldn't comprehend that she had packed the carbons, the only backups. A tiny, desperate hope remained. He immediately boarded a train back to Paris, praying that she had missed something, that a single folder, a single story had been left behind in the apartment. He searched everywhere. There was nothing. It was all gone. This event was more than just a professional setback. It was a deep psychic wound to their marriage. He had lost the work, but he had also lost a measure of faith. She had been his anchor, his steady hand. And in this one act, she had inadvertently become the agent of his deepest professional trauma. While he never publicly berated her for it, the loss hung between them, an unspoken ghost of her catastrophic mistake and his devastating heartbreak. The easy, unblemished trust that had been the hallmark of their union was gone, just like the manuscripts. Hemingway, with his characteristic resilience, eventually rewrote the stories from memory, and many believed the work was stronger for it. His career began to ascend, but as success beckoned, another, more insidious threat to their marriage appeared. Her name was Pauline Pfeiffer, though everyone called her Fife. Fife was a feature writer for the Paris edition of Vogue. She was chic, wealthy, sharp-witted, and moved with the effortless confidence of a woman who had never known hardship. She was, in every conceivable way, Hadley's opposite. Hadley, with her warm, unassuming nature, befriended Fife instantly. She saw a fascinating modern woman and welcomed her into their small, tight-knit circle. Fife became a constant presence, joining them for drinks, for dinners, and even on their sacred family holidays. Hadley, open-hearted and trusting, was completely blind to the fact that she was actively nurturing the woman who would dismantle her life. The affair between Ernest and Fife began subtly, then intensified. Fife, with the strategic mind of a journalist and the resources of her wealthy family, began a calculated campaign. She mirrored Ernest's interests, showered him with attention, and positioned herself as his intellectual equal. The winter of 1926 was the breaking point. The Hemingways, their son Bumby and Fife, were all together on a skiing holiday in Schruns, Austria. The idyllic alpine setting became the stage for a brutal emotional drama. The affair was now undeniable, a toxic presence that poisoned every interaction. The historical debate over this period is fierce. Hemingway himself, in A Movable Feast, crafts a narrative of his own helplessness. He paints Fife as a determined predator who cultivated Hadley to get to him and who systematically engineered the destruction of their marriage. He portrays himself as a man tormented by guilt but powerless against this new, overwhelming passion. This, of course, is a self-serving simplification. While Fife was undoubtedly an active and determined participant, the ultimate responsibility lay with Ernest. He was not a helpless boy, he was a man on the cusp of great fame. His novel, The Sun Also Rises, a thinly veiled account of their trip to the Pamplona bullfighting festival, was a sensation. He was no longer the poor, struggling artist Hadley had married. He was becoming a celebrity, and he was developing a taste for the finer things in life, things that Fife, with her family's fortune, could provide. He was drawn to her glamour and sophistication, which seemed a better fit for his new status than Hadley's quiet domesticity. Faced with an impossible situation, Hadley acted with a dignity that was almost superhuman. There were no public scenes, no bitter recriminations. During that terrible winter in Schruns, she confronted Ernest, and he confessed. He proposed a trial separation of 100 days. If, at the end of that period, his love for Fife had faded, he would return to Hadley. It was a cruel and cowardly ultimatum, placing the burden of waiting entirely on his wife. Hadley agreed, but she was no fool. She knew the marriage was over. When the 100 days were up, she granted him the divorce he wanted, but she did so on her own remarkable terms. She told him that if he and Fife were to marry, she wanted the rights, and all future royalties from the sun also rises. It was an act of quiet genius. She was laying claim to their shared history, ensuring that the literary masterpiece born from their life together would provide for her and their son for all the years to come. Ernest, racked with guilt, agreed immediately. In January 1927, the divorce was finalized. By May, Ernest was married to Pauline. And for many who tell the Hemingway story, this is where Hadley Richardson vanishes, a ghost of Paris past. But her erasure from the legend is the story's greatest injustice, because Hadley went on to write a second, and perhaps happier, act for herself. She did not crumble. She did not become the bitter, tragic figure that her story seemed to preordain. She remained a devoted mother to Bumby, fostering a strong bond between her son and his famous father. And after navigating the treacherous, emotional waters of her divorce, she eventually found love again, a love that was as peaceful and stable as her first had been brilliant and volatile. In 1933, she married Paul Scott Moore. He was a distinguished journalist and poet, the recipient of the very first Pulitzer Prize for correspondence for his reporting on World War I. He was a man of the world, an intellectual, but he was also kind, steadfast, and deeply devoted to her. With Paul, Hadley found a partnership of equals, built on a foundation of mutual respect and quiet contentment. They shared a long and happy marriage, living primarily in Chicago until his death in 1971. Hadley had found her safe harbor. She had proven that her identity was not contingent on being Mrs. Hemingway. She was Hadley Richardson Moore, a woman complete in her own right. The significance of Hadley's life extends far beyond her personal happiness. She was the indispensable catalyst for one of America's greatest writers. Her small inheritance was the seed money for his career. Her emotional stability was the anvil on which his early genius was hammered into shape. Her loss of his manuscripts, a devastating event, forced him to start over, to write with a new clarity and power. Her presence and the subsequent guilt of losing her haunts his work for the rest of his life. She has also become a powerful symbol for re-examining the role of women behind great men. She was not a passive muse. She was an active partner, a first reader, a skilled household manager, and a woman of profound emotional intelligence. Her story, in its quiet dignity and ultimate triumph, challenges the narrative of the disposable first wife. Ernest Hemingway died in 1961. Hadley outlived him by nearly 18 years, passing away peacefully in 1979 at the age of 87. Near the end of his own life, Hemingway wrote A Movable Feast, his memoir of those early Paris years. The book is a masterpiece of nostalgic prose, but more than that, it is a confession. It is his final desperate attempt to explain, to atone, to apologize to the woman he knew he should never have left. "I wished I had died before I ever loved anyone but her," he wrote. "A a line of staggering regret. He remembered their poverty as a time of immense richness, their love as the most real thing in his life. He tried to absolve himself by blaming Pauline, but his own guilt bleeds through every page. The book is a monument to his enduring love for Hadley, but Hadley did not need his apology. She had already moved on. She had built a life of her own, a life of peace, music, and lasting love. She proved that it is possible to survive the fire of a great destructive passion and emerge on the other side, not burned, but tempered. Her story is not a tragedy. It is a quiet epic of resilience. She was the first draft of Ernest Hemingway's life, the woman who helped him find his voice. But in the end, she found something far more valuable, her own. We're done for today. Thanks so much for watching. If you found this helpful, smash the like button, comment below, and hit subscribe for more great content coming your way soon.